So, our very, very last speaker is Josh Wolfe, who is a Zig Software Foundation board member, a core team member, advisor. Is there anything else that you think the audience should know about yourself other than your ZSF affiliation?
I am just kind of some guy. That's me.
Okay.
All right. Let's get a quick tech check. Microphone is working. Hello, everyone. I'm here to tell you about a story. This is going to be a roller coaster of a love story. We're going to start out at the beginning. So this is a music player that Andrew Kelly and I worked on. This is Groove Basin. And in 2014, we wanted to be able to upload zip files of music into our music library. This was running on a Node.js server. That means that in JavaScript, we need to be able to read a zip file. Maybe you bought an album on Amazon, you have this zip file of MP3s, we want to read that. And I surveyed the existing options on NPM in 2014 and determined that they were all bad. They were all problematic in one way or another. Maybe they locked up the main thread while doing synchronous I/O, or they tried to buffer the entire thing in RAM at once, or they read the zip file from start to finish using a streaming API. And you might be wondering, well, what's wrong with that? We'll get into it. So I made my own library. It's called Yowzel, which stands for yet another unzip library or something. The name doesn't really matter. And after working on Yowzel for a month or two, I decided that I wanted to seriously support this. I wanted to make this a contender for being the zip file library that everyone uses on NPM. So I added to it all of the things that you would expect in a high-quality open source project. We got the API docs, which if you're familiar with the NPM ecosystem is not a given. We had some tests. And you know what? I'm going to help people with their homework. If you've ever seen the Stack Overflow situation where someone asks a question and the response is, come on, buddy, you can't just put your homework questions in Stack Overflow. So there were times when people asked for help like, your software never works at all. And okay, I know that that's not my problem. I know that you're doing something wrong, but you know what? I wanted to help people anyway. So I was on there with in the issue thread, show me your code, let me try to help you debug it, all in the bug reports for my software, helping other people fix their software. And things were really great. This software was very successful. People really liked it. It got picked up by Browserify at some point, and that really launched the popularity of the downloads per month way up. And today, this is depended on by frameworks such as Electron and Cypress. Both of those I've heard of independently of Yowzel. I discovered when doing research for this talk that Yowzel was a dependency of those. So today, it's 14 million weekly downloads. Some of this is due to dependency hell on NPM, but it does mean that this is a very successful package. And this is one of my favorite issues. Yowzel issue 86 just says thanks, and the author closed it immediately. People really appreciated it. It was a success, and I was committed to making this be a well-supported software package. Okay, so what could go wrong? Here's something that the seasoned veterans of Node will know about. Back when I started this project, I was supporting Node 0.6, and the only way to make a buffer in that era was the buffer constructor. And much later down the road, the Node maintainers decided that this was insecure and not going to be supported anymore. That's because when you make a buffer of memory, it was uninitialized values, so there's a security problem there. But I knew that at the time, and I was careful to initialize every byte. So my software didn't have this problem, but the bots, nonetheless, the security scanning bots flagged my software as being insecure because it was using the buffer constructor. And so, okay, someone else's design flaw means that I now have to work around this in my code. I'm responsible for solving other people's problems. That kind of sucks. And then in addition to just general NPM instability, there were problems with other zip file implementations in the wild. So the .NET framework had a few versions where they would put backslashes in file names, which is not allowed. You can't do that in a zip file. But nonetheless, there were backslashes in file names in zip files in the wild. So I had to work around that. I had to put in special handling for normalizing backslashes, even though that was against the spec. The WinRAR utility, which can create zip files, something I learned about on this software project, does Unicode in a really weird way where they just lie about the file name, and then in an extended data, they say, actually, the file name is this. So, they put the file name in there twice. And then the Apple Archive utility, the one built into Mac OS. Oh boy. I can summarize what's wrong by just saying, oh boy, again. And in order to get into this, we need to take a little technical interlude, and I'm going to explain how the zip file format works. So, an archive format is where you take lots of files and you stick them all together in one big file. So these purple chunks here, those are the files that you've accumulated together. Maybe these are MP3 files. And all the gray slices are the metadata that tells you things like the file name, the permission bits, and also they tell you where in the archive the file data starts and ends. So where is the purple data in here? And a thing that I was surprised to find out when I learned about the zip file spec is that the central index of where everything is located is actually at the end of the file. So you start reading zip files at the end, and then it points backwards to where everything is. So this is why reading a zip file from start to finish doesn't work. It's broken. You have to start at the end. But then how did anyone make it a library where you could do that? And what are all these other gray rectangles? Well, these other gray rectangles are the local file header. It turns out all of the metadata is duplicated. Almost all the metadata is duplicated. So in the local file header, it also gives you the file name. Every file name is in there twice, which means for WinRAR, it's in there 4 times. And it also tells you the size of the purple file data. So you can start at the beginning and you can read through to the end. Oh, great. Well, then what's the central directory for if we have all this information in the local file header? Well, in order to support writing a zip file from start to finish, and you might be compressing the file data as you go. The file data can be compressed or not. You might not know what the file size is. You might not know how big the purple data is going to be. So in the official specification, and implementations do this out in the wild, you're allowed to just not know what the file size is. That data is allowed to just be missing from the local file header, but it is in the central directory. So what's the local file header for then? If we can't read from start to finish, why not just have everything in the central directory? What is the point of this? So this is the main mistake that the library was using when it tried to read from start to finish, is that it was expecting the local file header to be complete when it's actually not ever guaranteed to be complete. But wait, says the zip file specification author, I can fix this. All we need to do is right after the purple data, we're going to put something called the data descriptor, which has this magic number, or maybe it doesn't have the magic number. That part's actually optional. And then it has a CRC32, and then it's got the file sizes that point back to the start of the file so that you can tell if you're looking for the end of the file, you just find this magic number maybe, and then you know that you've reached the end of the file. But hang on a second. The file data might not be compressed, which means that this sentinel is trivially spoofable, and that would create an ambiguous zip file, which is a security hazard. So, okay, even if this wasn't intentionally spoofed, imagine that you just imagine if you just package up a zip file inside of another zip file. So the inner zip file has this magic number right in the middle of this purple data. So you're going to run into the magic number, and then the checksum is going to be wrong. So is the checksum supposed to be detecting single-bit corruption, or is the checksum supposed to tell you, this is not your data descriptor, keep looking? So maybe it's the file sizes. That should never be wrong on accident, right? Except that the file sizes are either 32 bits or 64 bits based on information that you can only find in the central directory. What is this for? This entire thing is a bad idea. This is trash. And not only is it kind of broken and doesn't really work all the time, this misleads naive implementers into creating a security hazard. This is really bad. Surely no one would be naive enough to try to rely on this information. Okay, funny transition aside, as a zip file reader library, I actually don't care how Apple Archive Utility reads archives. I care about how they write archives, because then I have to read them. So let's talk about how the Apple Archive Utility writes archives. As I just mentioned, file sizes can be 32 bits or 64 bits. Zip files were made in the era of floppy disks, so 32 bits was considered enough at the time, but then an extension had to be added to the zip file specification to allow oversized integers. So if your files are bigger than 4 gigabytes, or if you have more than 65,000 number of files, then you need to use the extended metadata. You need to put in the zip64 extension sections into your zip file. And Apple Archive Utility just doesn't do that. They don't support inserting the extended zip64 metadata. Okay, no big deal. That means they don't support oversized zip files, right? No, they do. They still create oversized zip files. Are they using a proprietary extension then? How do they encode the file sizes and the number of files if they don't use the extended format? Would you believe that they just let their integers overflow and write truncated bits? So in an archive utility file, you're going to get the local file header that just points to garbage. Everything is just nonsense in an archive utility archive. This is worse than trash. This is the number of files, 66,000 files. If you put that in an archive, it says you have 464 files. And you can reproduce this with unzip-t or whatever. Yeah, it just lies. So this is worse than trash. This is omega trash. This is so difficult to support. And one of the things that Yowzel does as a security feature to prevent zip bomb attacks is before you try to extract the data in a file, you are given an accurate size of the file. So you're never going to be surprised by it being bigger than it really is. So in order for Yowzel to correctly support reading these zip files, Yowzel would need to do a really advanced lookup where it skips around in the archive to see if maybe everything's off by a multiple of 4 billion. And I had a plan for doing this. I came up with a really complicated solution on paper, and it was going to be a lot of work to implement. And I was working on it off and on for over a year. And without making progress on anything else in this project, I eventually came up with a test case that failed without any code to actually solve the problem. And that's when my enthusiasm for this project completely died. And I couldn't bring myself to make any more progress on it. This is a project that I had cared so much about. I was willing to help people with their homework. I was adding features. I was working around other people's bugs. And now I just didn't want to think about it anymore. Even on the issues, people would ask simple questions like this one. This would have taken me 10 seconds to respond to. Not supported, see the README, closed. But I had just left it open. I couldn't even bear to think about this project. I was so burnt out. At one point, someone opened an issue that just said, this project is unmaintained. Use my fork. And I just left it open. So, for reasons unrelated to software engineering, I was getting actual therapy. I was trying to answer some really important questions. Like this one here. How do I really feel? And this is a concept in therapy called empathizing with yourself. And if I had heard this phrase when I was in high school, I would have thought it was stupid. Empathizing with myself, well, I am myself. I'm always empathizing with myself. How could I ever not know how I feel? Stupid. Okay, let's come back to that. At the time when I was burnt out on Yaozul, I thought I knew why. I thought I knew what was bothering me so much. And I would tell people confidently, whoever wanted to ask about this. I knew that the reason why I burnt out was the buffer constructor. I was sick of solving other people's bugs, like the buffer constructor, and that just burnt me out on the project. I knew that this archive utility corruption thing was hard to work around, but I just saw it as a challenge, not like as a drain on my enthusiasm. But something's wrong with this buffer constructor hypothesis, which is that it's really easy to work around. You just change one expression of code to another, and then it's solved. This is not hard. So before we get into what really killed my enthusiasm, it's worth just focusing in on this for a moment. I was wrong about how I felt. I didn't understand my own feelings. And if you're out there and you think that empathizing with yourself is a trivial concept, that you can obviously empathize with yourself, you might be bad at this too. So when I went to therapy, I was able to learn some techniques for identifying how I felt. And I had discovered, and again, I was going to therapy for reasons unrelated to software, but I discovered that a lot of problems in my life had been caused by my inability to empathize with myself. There were relationships with my family that felt really strained and weird and really uncomfortable for me, and I didn't really know why until I realized that I had feelings that I wasn't aware of. I had friendships where I thought I was looking forward to hanging out with them until it came to the point to leave the house, and then I was dreading going because I didn't know how I really felt about that friend. And I can't even tell you how many romantic relationships were sabotaged by myself because I didn't know how I felt about my partner. So after learning this skill and going back to this project, to Yaozul, and applying it, I eventually figured out what had drained my enthusiasm. And the answer is that I was allowing Apple to emotionally abuse me. Yeah, this may sound silly, like Apple's a giant corporation. They don't care about you. They don't even know you exist. They just made some buggy piece of software and then did nothing. And yeah, Apple didn't actively do anything here, but I allowed Apple to emotionally abuse me because of the relationship that I created with them. So let's look at this bug, this archive utility corruption bug. Archive utility is closed source. There's no public bug tracker. I couldn't tell if anyone had reported this before or if the maintainers were interested in fixing it. So I can't work with them. They're not interested in working with me on this. And if I want to test my changes, I don't own any Apple technology, so I would have to pay them to work around their bug. So this whole thing, this is me doing a lot of work for them and them doing nothing for me. And to make this even worse, I thought I had to support this. I had supported the .NET bug. I'd supported the WinRAR bug. And archive utility is even more popular than these other two. Of course, I have to support this if I want to be a real zip file implementation. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, the solution is obvious. But it's really difficult to let go of this issue. It's really difficult to allow myself to be proud of my software with a flaw like this. But in therapy, I learned about accepting myself. And if this phrase also sounds bizarre to you, you might benefit from going to therapy. But I learned to accept myself. And I learned that my software was valuable. There were 14 million downloads a week. People were using my software, even without this feature. I was using my software. It was working for Groove Basin. I don't need Apple's approval for my software to be good enough. And if you model an enthusiasm-driven project economically, enthusiasm is the funding. And the cost of interfacing with archive utility is just too high. So eventually, I finally managed to convince myself not support it. I closed the Yausel issue, which was the most active issue on the bug tracker by far. I apologized, said, sorry, I'm not going to support this. It's just too hard. And just like that, my enthusiasm returned for the project. I was able to make several new releases. After 6 years of silence, I implemented all sorts of features and helped out all sorts of people who had issues. But now, I was doing things that I enjoyed and that I thought were fun. And I was only able to make that discernment because I knew how I felt. Also, no more helping people with their homework. There's one issue somebody opened, and I appreciate the honesty. It said, I haven't read the code or looked at any of the issues, but you should be using BigInts. And this was my response. Nah. Issue closed. All right, that's it.
Thank you very much, Josh. So, take a moment to sip some water, pull up your mic. I think it's falling down a little bit. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so I think there's going to be some questions from the audience, but man, there's been a couple very relatable talks at the end of this event. I did not plan for this. I expected talks to be good, but I'm also being surprised that it was great. You know what? Let's have questions, and then maybe I'll add a comment or two afterwards. So let's see. Raise of hands for anybody who has questions. Okay, I don't see hands. You know what? I'll break the ice then. So what are your thoughts then about, for example, the Log4Shell situation? Because you remember, right, when people discovered that there was this login library used everywhere in the Java ecosystem, and then the authors, I feel like they got super pressed into like delivering a fix very quickly, and then everybody started shouting about, oh my God, open source needs more funding because of all this situation. Did you have any thoughts?
Open source needs more funding is the idea. Well, I have to say I'm not an expert in funding open source projects. The project that I was doing was all volunteer work. I will say that the bug seemed pretty bad, that Log4j vulnerability. So like, don't screw up.
Yeah, Log4j. Right.
I'm trying to think of something more interesting to say in response to this.
Okay, let me ask you then a related question. Would more funding have helped you with your project?
No. I am not. This project is not motivated by money.
Right.
I don't really want to accept any money for this. I'm pretty defensive about the motivation that I have for this project. I want it to be motivated by making quality software and supporting actual people who would use it.
Right.
So the enthusiasm of the community and my own enthusiasm are the funding. And if I accepted money, then it would become like a business venture. And whenever I make this evaluation about like, should I bother to do something or not, I can't just rely on enthusiasm. I have to also weigh in the money, and then like to put a monetary value on how much pain I'm willing to go through is a situation I really don't want to be in. So I much prefer to do this project driven only by enthusiasm, but I respect everybody who is not willing to work for free. It's not really something that you can expect someone to do. But that is how I preferred to do this project.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, the people who were talking about funding, as far as I'm aware, weren't even the authors. They was like, the peanut gallery, people when looking at open source and like the kind of discourse that you have in the wild. I do feel like, and again, I can't speak for experience because I haven't been there personally, but I do feel like that just like, in a sense, the healthiest choice for you was at some point to say, allow me. Fuck this. I'm not going to support this stupid thing. I'm going to drop it. That's where I decide my project goes. This is where I decide to stop. I feel like also the people from the login library could have been right. It was in the right to say, whatever, you want to fix this bug, I'm busy doing something else, you do it. Like, I gave you the software with the usual warranty where there isn't any warranty. And so... but I don't think that's what happened in that case. I don't remember all the details, but I feel like people felt like being more involved, which probably had also bad implications for their mental health. Let's see. Any questions in the meantime? Oh, yeah. We got one up there and a couple more. And one here. Sorry. Let's go.
Oh, yeah. So the idea of the conclusion really resonated with like having something that you really invested in and not having a way to solve it for a very long time, and then being able to finally like put it down and recognize like your own issues with it. Is there a name for the condition of not being able to recognize how you feel about something, or how you what your relationship is with whether that be a person or whatever project that you're working on that like interacts with your personality?
So I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an expert. I actually suck at emotional intelligence. That's why I'm going to therapy. But maybe an answer for you is just the concept of emotional intelligence. And being able to empathize with yourself is extremely valuable in passion projects and all over your life. Something that I think was mentioned in a talk earlier today. It's like a lot of people in this room probably think of ourselves as very logical people. But if you think you're logical and not emotional, you're probably just unaware of your emotions. Every human is emotional. And if you're not aware of it, you might want to get therapy. Yeah, I can't give you a very detailed answer for what this is called. I wasn't given like a diagnosis or anything, but empathizing with myself was the thing that I needed to learn, and the thing that was most helpful for my continued contribution to Yaozil.
Hey, so I have a question. So first of all, I really like the talk. This was my favorite talk of the whole conference. So my question is, it sounds like, your whole driving force behind working on this project is like wanting this to be one of the best projects for this, wanting other people using this to be successful. How do you reconcile that with not wanting to help people with their kind of trivial homework at the end?
So one of the key points about not wanting to help people with their homework is that I am being more defensive about how much of my own enthusiasm I'm willing to put into it relative to how much effort the other person is putting into it. There was an issue opened that said invalid comment, expected length 16, found length 60,000 or something like that. And that was the entire text of the issue. I'm not going to ask this person for more information. I'm just going to say I can't help you without more information. That was a change that I made because this isn't someone who's asking a very detailed question, who seems interested in not wasting my time. This is someone who just posted a very lazy comment and was hoping that someone else would solve their problem for them. So the thing where I'm not helping people with their homework means that I'm not going to put myself out there unless I think it's going to be worth it for me.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Great talk. I really enjoyed it. And I guess, how do you think that would have played out, or in the middle of that 6-year period sometime, if Apple, for example, had actually been more responsive and somebody had maybe asked you for more information, or, given you what you needed to do, what needed to happen to fix the bug or the situation, or even if someone had just dropped in with like a parachuted perfect PR that fixed it, like, how would that have affected your feelings about the project?
That is a great question. And unfortunately, because I kind of suck at emotional intelligence, I can't answer it for sure. It's a bit of a hypothetical. But if Apple had been more responsive and willing to work with me, then I'm sure that really would have helped. Because the main problem that I had was this lopsided relationship that I had with Apple, where I was putting in a bunch of work and they were doing nothing. So if they'd been willing to put in the work, that would have helped me a lot. For example, the .NET bug with the backslashes, before I was even aware of it, they had already fixed it. They had put in a fix for that. And so that was, it was technically easy for me to support. But also, that was a good relationship. Like that means that I'm not alone in solving this problem. Now, with the archive utility corruption bug, that was a really nasty technical bug to have to solve. So I'm not exactly sure where I would have landed on that, but it would have helped me emotionally if they'd been willing to work with me.
Hi, I'd like to just make an appeal for the audience that if you're a user of a project and you have some experience with it, you can help the maintainers not do the homework for other people by just go on, it's not gamified like on Stack Overflow, but you can just go on to pull the issues on GitHub for a project and help with the trivial things. It takes just absolutely no time, but it's kind of just annoying. But I do also have a question, which is basically almost all GitHub repos become unmaintained in a short amount of time, and yet like they might have some value. How can we if somebody is starting a new project, which many people in this audience will be probably like in the upcoming week even, how do you prepare for something being unmaintained eventually and still hopefully like bringing value to somebody?
Do you mean if you're worried that your own project will become unmaintained?
Well, it shouldn't be a worry, right? It's like a reality.
Oh, you're saying that you want to make a project, but you know that you won't want to maintain it forever. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because that's what you see all the time. That's normal.
Well, if you want to support a project, then you can make your intention known through your actions or through an explicit statement. And if you're ready to give up and move on, or not give up, but if you consider the work to be complete, and you're not interested in working on it anymore, you can just say that at the top of the README. GitHub even has a feature where you can archive a repository, and there should be no shame in people documenting what they're not willing to do. If someone says I don't want to maintain this anymore, that's perfectly fine. There should be no shame in that. And that also does signal to the rest of the community of people who want to use that software or an alternate version that it's time to look for an alternate version. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does, yeah. Thank you.
Oops. I want to respond to this question of, is there a term for accessing emotions, feelings, or and I just reminded myself that there's this term. I just want to say it. This a different word, alexithymia. This is like a scientific term for not feeling emotions. That would be the answer. And another recommendation, or like something I like to recommend, is in this way, like this modality of focusing and the concept of the felt sense. And that would be my recommendation if someone's interested in getting into this area.
Thank you.
Hi, great talk, relatable. One thing, what I got from how you described it, and maybe I'm wrong there, it was more or less self-induced that you got frustrated with the whole situation. I have found like abuse online in comments, in bug reports. Have you had that same experience, and how did you deal with it?
Have I?
So people just writing like really not like, oh, it's a pity it doesn't work. No, like you have to solve this, otherwise you're an a-hole. That kind of comments I have had, where it's like, hey guys, I've been working on this for 10 years. And so have you had that kind of comments on this specific issue, or on working on this software, or because you haven't updated it for 6 years? And what did you do with it if you got it?
I believe that I have been fortunate enough not to receive that kind of aggression online. Okay. And I can speculate on why that is. I think that my very eagerness to help attitude probably set things off in a direction that sort of mitigated that kind of responses. But during the 6 years with no update, there were people who were posting questions and not getting an answer. During that time, actually, there were other people that did respond and helped people with trivial questions. It never came to any kind of aggression against me, which I'm very grateful for. So I can't really help with that situation.
Let's do a couple more questions.
About the Apple thing, would you think that also the kind of thing where you can't let go of a certain feature, would that also apply to self-set goals, or something that's not imposed by like a third party where you can control it, but something that you can control, but it just doesn't, it just becomes sort of an obsession more than anything.
Yeah, if you find yourself in an obsession to accomplish a goal, and the pursuit of that goal is so draining that it's robbing your ability to do anything else, I would recommend emotional awareness to recognize what's going on. If you've got a reservoir of enthusiasm and you need that bucket to be full to make progress, and there's a hole in the bucket, something's draining your enthusiasm out of the bucket, you got to know what that is. So it could be that there's a self-imposed goal that's doing this. It could be externally imposed. But for a volunteer project, it's always self-imposed. Nobody can tell you what to do in a volunteer project. I mean, they can, but ultimately you get to decide what you want to do for free. And you get to decide what you want to support. And then ideally, you document what you want to support and what you don't want to support. Now, this all gets a lot more complicated if this is like in your job, if your employment, if your well-being depends on doing something that's a huge emotional drain to you. I don't have an easy solution to that. It's easy enough to say, just get a new job, but that's not always an option for everybody. So that's a lot more tricky if the external factor that's draining your enthusiasm really can't be avoided by just giving up on it. I don't have an easy answer for that, but that is a much more tricky situation.
One last question.
Thanks for the talk. You talk about 3 archivers that we can say are software you cannot love, like the WinRAR, the Apple one, of course, and the .NET. Are there any that you will say are archivers that you can love and that reach like high quality and are up to spec and whatnot?
The InfoZip implementation, which is the one on standard Linux, like the command line unzip program, that one seems fine. I've read through the source code to try to get insight into what I should be doing, and there's some questionable decisions in there. I wish it were a little bit better documented, their rationale for doing it. But I've had no problems with InfoZip. That one seems great.
Okay. Thank you very much, Josh. I think that... Yeah, please give it up a bit. I think this was a beautiful way of closing the conference. We started by talking about business and how actually like hard-cold money does make a difference. And then we ended with a different problem, right? Where money isn't really the problem at all. But at the same time, it is still a little bit a matter of economics. It's just a different type of economics, right? It's a matter of enthusiasm. And you have enthusiasm vampires and situations that are like our black holes for enthusiasm. I've talked also in the past about how that also can happen when building communities themselves. Like it's a real thing. It's a real facet of like social economics, if you will, in communities. So I hope that everybody got something out of, this entire set of talks. So please give it up again for Josh.